everybody, this is JDGaming, back today with an in-depth introduction to Aromages. This archetype of plant-based monsters borrows the name from the word aromatherapy, which is the concept in which plant essential oils and other products are used to heal the body. This is reflected in the monster's abilities, where they all have a continuous effect that happens while you are healthier than your opponent by having more life points than them, as well as a trigger ability that activates any time you gain life points, in other words, whenever you heal. Looking at the main deck monsters, we're starting off with the most important one in Aromage Jasmine, a level 2 light plant with 100 attack and 1900 defense, who has the effects as follows. While you're healthier than your opponent, you can perform an additional normal summon with a plant-type monster as long as it's not named Aromage Jasmine. Note that this does have the you can only gain this effect once per turn clause, which means it cannot stack with any other card with that same text, including the popular Gem Knight Seraph Knight. However, it is still a powerful way to bring out your other Aromage monsters, and a good way to bring out generic plant support like Lone Fire Blossom, allowing you to very easily put together big boards. The next ability also works towards this by allowing you to draw a card per copy of Jasmine once per turn whenever you gain life points. This is a powerful ability because it's very easy to assemble multiple copies of Aromage Jasmine through the plant support like Lone Fire Blossom and the Aromaseraphy Jasmine that we have in our extra deck as a link monster. When you assemble 2 or even 3 of these cards and gain life points during your turn, or even your opponent's turn, you're drawing a card for each and every one of those copies, which is extremely powerful given the first ability allowing you to put those cards to use. The next monster we'll talk about is Aromage Rosemary, a level 4 water monster with 1800 attack and 700 defense. Her healthy ability allows all of your plant monsters to block your opponent from responding anytime they attack. This is awesome because it stops monster effects that would stop you in battle, something like a Link Karibo, let's say. It also stops your opponent's annoying floating monsters like the Burning Abyss from responding to your abilities. Although it doesn't stop spell and traps, monster effects seem to be king these days in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyway, so being able to stop the major portion of the game is a nice bonus to all of your plant monsters. Her trigger ability is one that allows you, or rather forces you, to change the battle position of one face-up monster when you gain life points. It's very important to play Rosemary properly, as if you're playing against a field of all face-down monsters or link monsters, Rosemary may have to shift herself to defense position. However, with a little bit of careful planning, it's not difficult to play around that potential pitfall with the card, and it's actually quite helpful in putting Aromage Jasmine to defense position after you summon her in attack position, extra normal summon your Rosemary, and then you can shift your Jasmine back into defense position. Next up, we have the first male in the archetype Aromage Cananga, a level 3 earth monster with 1400 attack and 1000 defense. While you're healthier than your opponent, he debuffs all your opponent's face-up monsters by 500 attack and defense, which in combination with a card like your Synchro monster that we'll talk about down the line, can add up to a huge swing in power. However, since it doesn't actually gain you any attack points, it's important to note that you may not always have a use for this card, especially considering its other ability is the ability to bounce a spell or trap your opponent controls to their hand if you gain life points. While being able to stop your opponent's counter traps from ever being set for a long enough time to be relevant is an okay use for this card, it's usually not a strong enough pick. And even in the side deck, you're probably better off playing other cards that are able to actually remove the threats your opponent has on the field. Finally, for the original Aromages, we have Aromage Bergamot. This other guy is a level 6 fire monster who brings a ton of power with 2400 attack and 1800 defense. While your life points are higher than your opponent's, if any of your plant monsters attacks your opponent's monster, you inflict piercing damage through their defensive monster. In addition, if you gain life points, once per turn this will gain 1000 attack and defense until the end of the opponent's turn, an entire turn cycle allowing you to not only fight through your opponent's cards and inflict massive damage with piercing, but also withstand your opponent's attacks, because on its own, it'll go up to 3400 for 1 tribute. Aromaseraphy Angelica is a relatively new monster that came out down the line years after the original Aromages came out in Clash of Rebellion. Angelica is a level 1 light tuner monster with 0 attack and defense points, and it mirrors a lot of things in the game that end up working perfectly for this archetype. During either player's turn, you can pitch this card as a hand trap, in order to target one of your Aroma monsters in your graveyard. You instantly gain life points equal to that monster's attack, which is great for triggering your abilities even during your opponent's turn. Then while you're healthier than your opponent, and you happen to control an aroma monster, and this card's in the graveyard, which looks like a lot, but hey, you put this card in the graveyard on its own, so you simply need to have an aroma monster and be healthier, which your deck is aiming to do. You can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Angelica once per turn, but man are those two abilities very important. Not only are you able to use this card to react to your opponent's plays using your aroma monsters, but you're also able to bring it back a la glow-up bulb to extend your plays. Especially with the introduction of the link monster Aromaseraphy Jasmine, Aromaseraphy Angelica ends up becoming a lot more useful to us, because having a face-up plant monster contributes to the summoning requirements of 2 plant monsters for Jasmine. This 1800 attack Link 2 monster points diagonally in both directions, which is nice because it allows you to go ahead and make bigger boards by summoning more of your Synchro and Link monsters. Following the pattern, if you're healthier than your opponent, this card protects itself as well as any plant monsters that she may be pointing to from being destroyed by battle. It also lets you go and tribute a monster it points to of any type or attribute in order to special summon 1 plant monster from your deck in defense position. That monster may not be able to attack because of its positioning, but it's not restricted from using its abilities, and you can summon any plant monster from your deck, making it very similar to Lone Fire Blossom, and in some ways, the Forbidden Summon Sorceress. Finally, you can't have an aroma monster without gaining life points and then having some trigger effect on the heal, and this card lets you search any plant monster from your deck to your hand. A lot of times in a pure Aromage deck, you'll be searching out a copy of Angelica, maybe even using a copy of Angelica to ensure that you've gained life points, triggered all your other abilities, and then still have one for the next turn. But it is important to note that it lets you add any plant monster, so the sky's the limit in terms of your imagination and the combos that you'd like to create. The last extra deck monster thus far is Aromaseraphy Rosemary, a monster with 2000 attack, 900 defense, sitting at a level 5 Synchro monster. This monster has generic requirements, which seems to be a necessity to be able to play any of these cards these days, and it has 2 abilities that follow the same pattern as the other aroma monsters. While you're healthier than your opponent, all of your plant monsters, including herself, will gain 500 attack and defense points, which is nice because this card will basically be a 2500 beat stick at level 5. Not bad at all. And it gets even stronger when you consider some of the other key cards of the archetype. Then, if you gain life points once per turn, again, like the original Rosemary, this ends up becoming a little bit difficult to time, but you're able to choose 1 face-up card on the field, doesn't matter if it's a monster, spell, or trap, and you're able to negate its effects for the turn. That ends up working very nicely in your favor for blanking cards that your opponent may have that are floodgates or annoying monsters that you don't want to have to deal with, like the aforementioned Link Karibo. And the fact that you're potentially able to use it to respond to some of your opponent's continuous abilities or more predictable abilities that are sitting on the field during their turn isn't a bad bonus. But generally, this card is going to be used to break your opponent's board more so than actually try to block them out of a play during their turn. Returning to the main deck now for some of the spells and traps, we have Aroma Garden, a field spell that lets you once per turn gain 500 life points if you have an aroma monster. This not only triggers all of your abilities, but also has an additional ability that gains 500 attack and defense on every one of your monsters, whether or not this card still exists on the field. What that means is if you play Aroma Garden, gain 500 life points and, consequently, all the 500 attack and defense points, and then play another copy of Aroma Garden, all of your monsters would still have the 500 boost. Then you can use the second Aroma Garden to give them another 500 boost, and potentially you could play a third copy and have everything gain a 1500 boost. And the way this card works, the monsters never had to be on the field to see the garden in the first place. So if you summon a monster down the line, it will still carry that 500, 1000, or 1500 boost until the end of the opponent's next turn. It also has an additional ability that says when an aroma monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you gain 1000 life points. Again, this is a mandatory trigger ability, and the fact that you can't choose when to activate your cards can be a bit of a downfall from time to time. However, with the flexibility of cards like Aromaseraphy Angelica allowing you to cherry pick the effects you actually need to use, Aroma Garden's life point boost is a nice last-ditch effort to make sure you don't lose the game by losing all your life points, as well as getting out some extra abilities if you had no decent way of triggering them earlier during your opponent's turn. The next 2 cards are continuous trap cards that were the core of the strategy for a long time. Humid Winds is a continuous trap that says you can pay 1000 life points to add an aroma monster from your deck to your hand, essentially serving as a reinforcement of the army for the archetype. It is a bit slow as a trap card, but it also has the flexibility of allowing you to search a card during each turn. And when you combine it with the second ability that reads, if your life points are lower than your opponent's, you can gain back 500 at any point in the turn, it becomes a flexible way to trigger all your abilities, as well as search the key cards you need. You can only use each effect of Humid Winds once per turn, and it is important to note that certain builds of the strategy may not need to play Humid Winds anymore, because the search ability is replicated in Aromaseraphy Jasmine, and you have other ways of gaining life points during your opponent's turn now. Humid Winds is still a viable option if you're playing more of a defensive, trap-based build, but nowadays I opt for other options. Dried Winds, however, is a very interesting trap card that says if you gain life points, you could target a face-up monster your opponent controls and destroy it. That means you could take life point advantage over your opponent and turn it into something tangible, because every turn you could destroy one of their monsters just for doing what your deck is trying to do. In addition, if you control an aroma monster and your life points is at least 3,000 higher than your opponent's, you can turn all that extra health to good use. By paying life points down to the difference and making your life equal to your opponent's, you can destroy all their face-up monsters if their attack is less than or equal to the life points you paid. Otherwise, you just cherry pick the ones that add up to less than or equal to the amount you paid and pick off those. You can only use each effect of Dried Winds once per turn, as you may have expected from Humid Winds, but essentially Dried Winds allows you to clear your opponent's entire board from time to time, especially when you combine it with cards like the brand new Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. This card deserves a special mention in this archetype in particular, because not only does Ghost Sister basically say your opponent is not going to be able to create a new board of special summon monsters to kill you, because every one of those monsters' attack points is basically added to your life points, cancels out any battle damage it would do, but this is a very easy way to gain more than 3,000 life points than your opponent, and on top of that, you have enough life points to kill all the monsters your opponent summoned, because you gained life points for every one of those. Thus, this new hand trap, though a bit controversial in its use outside of time scenarios and dumb shenanigans, is actually a legitimate choice for the archetype, because it not only triggers your abilities during your turn, but also lets you have a huge life point surplus over your opponent necessary to make sure you get all of your abilities, including that of Dried Winds. From here, I want to talk about some of the other support that you can use in this strategy. Lone Fire Blossom, I've mentioned, is a great monster to use for the additional normal summon of Jasmine, but you can also use Lone Fire Blossom in order to fetch whatever key Aromage piece you may need for your combo. This card is an obvious 3-of for this strategy, but as a plant-based deck, you may not want to burn through all your Lone Fires like you would in some other strategies, because the deck thinning is not as important as having 2 additional copies of a wild card floating around in your deck that basically lets you choose whatever card you would like at any point. Super Solar Nutrient basically mimics Lone Fire Blossom's ability, allowing you to tribute a low-level plant monster that's level 2 or lower in order to special summon a plant from your hand or deck that has a level that is less than 3 more than your tributed monster. The wording on this card is extremely confusing, but the way it works basically is if you tribute or an Aromage Jasmine, you start with a level 2. You add 3 to that, giving you a level 5, which means now you could summon any plant monster from your hand or deck that is level 5 or lower. If you choose a level 1 monster, like Aromaseraphy Angelica or another card like 𝕿𝖆𝖇𝖊 or Spore, you'd be able to go and summon a level 4 or lower plant monster from your deck. Since both of those allow you to summon Lone Fire Blossom from your hand or deck, this basically turns all your extra copies of plant monsters you're already playing into your wildcard searcher. So this increases your consistency substantially, even though it on surface looks like a card that's so reliant on your other cards. You're simply playing so many targets, and it replicates the key effect that you would like to get your combos started. Aroma Jar is something I didn't mention during the key portion of the Aromage theme, because even though Cananga and Bergamot can see play from time to time depending on the build that you may have or the play environment, Aroma Jar just doesn't really fit into the strategy very well. It's a level 1 wind monster with 500 attack and 400 defense, and it's a rock flip effect monster. If this card is flipped face up, this card cannot be destroyed by battle while it's face up on the field. If this card is flipped face up, during each player's end phase, you gain 500 life points. Now the problems with this card, even beyond the fact that it's an extremely slow flip effect monster, and that it's a rock monster and not a plant, and all these other issues, is that you're gaining life points once per turn during the end phase, a very fixed time where you're not able to really take advantage of those strategies that you need. The only real benefit you'd have from doing something like this is drawing an additional card off of the Jasmine or Jasmines that you could not trigger that turn, and maybe bouncing away some of your opponent's spells or traps using Cananga. But in general, Aroma Jar is just not a high impact card, and especially given the fact that nothing really fits into the rest of the theme, the card is better off not being used in most strategies. A few cards that you may consider looking at, depending on the build, however, are Poison of the Old Man, which is a quick play spell that basically lets you gain 1200 life points as a quick effect, triggering any of your abilities at any time. Cactus Bouncer, which is a monster that, while it can't be special summoned, prevents each player from special summoning monsters. Magic Planter fits naturally into the strategy if you happen to be playing more copies of Dried Winds, Humid Winds, and maybe even some other plant support along the way. Rivalry of Warlords is not a terrible option for being able to restrict your opponent, and even cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance could be played as long as you build your deck to support it without too many spells that would backfire on your own. Finally, I do want to talk about Ancient Sacred Wyvern, another card for the extra deck that seems to fit fairly well with this theme. This 2100 attack level 7 synchro monster needs a light tuner and any non-tuners in order to make it, which means it could be a combination of either Bergamot with Aromaseraphy Angelica, or even something as off the wall as Mathematician into 𝕿𝖆𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓 Lightsworn Archer. Once you bring out Ancient Sacred Wyvern, the goal is to just end the game in one shot. It gains attack points equal to the surplus in life points you have over your opponent, which is perfect for this strategy. It does technically lose attack points if you're lower than your opponent, but then again, if you're doing that, you're probably losing the game anyway. This is another good option to take advantage of all the life points you'll be gaining and actually turn it into a way of ending the game. Do keep in mind though that the biggest challenge in bringing this card out is the requirement for a light tuner monster, which means you may have to build your deck with some awkward plays in order to be able to incorporate this card. And there you have it, an in-depth introduction to Aromages. If you've played with the theme before and I missed anything important, let me know down below. And if you may be interested in the theme, be sure to check out the iCard in the top right hand corner where I'm sharing some of the decks that I've made using this theme. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JDGaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.